Hello. Thanks everybody for standing by. We appreciate your presence for today's webinar. Remember, today's webinar, all attendees will be in listen-only mode for the duration of the event. Today's webinar is being recorded. If you have any objections, it's probably a good time to disconnect now. Thanks for joining us today for another of BroadbandUSA's monthly webinar. I'm Don Williams, Senior Specialist for Broadband Development with NTIA's BroadbandUSA. Today's webinar focuses on how broadband enhances local economies. The session is going to provide an overview of how communities and broadband providers are working together to expand broadband access to residents and businesses and other institutions to build resilient rural economies. We have a great cast today of presenters. I'm happy to introduce them. Our presenters today are Lauren Mathena, Director of Economic Development for MidAtlantic Broadband. Idranil Kumar, PhD, Regional Planning Principal for Purdue Center for Regional Development. And Josh Seidemann, Vice President of Policy for NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association. Let's review a few logistics. First, we're going to open up the webinar for questions after the completion of the presentations. As you hear from each presenter, you can use the question box on the right-hand side of your screen to submit your questions and comments. Second, the presentation along with the transcript and audio recording of today's session will be available on the BroadbandUSA website in approximately 7 days. When you go to the website, you'll find it under Events, Past Events tab. Finally, and I really do encourage you to do this, visit the BroadbandUSA website for information about our technical assistance program, which I am a part of and is wonderful, including useful guides, products, publications, and other tools that can assist you and your community in planning, funding, and implementing a broadband project. The newest additions to our website are the exciting permitting section, as well as American Broadband Initiative Milestone Report. That's going to be under the Federal tab. Well, it's time for us to begin, and I'm very happy to introduce our first speaker, Lauren Mathena. Lauren is the Director of Economic Development and Community Engagement at MidAtlantic Broadband, MBC. In her role, Lauren serves as a regional ecosystem builder and represents MBC to a variety of local, state, and national stakeholders, including Southern Virginia's economic developers who rely on MBC's network for business attraction, retention, and expansion. Lauren's currently leading a very interesting program for the SOVA Initiative Hub, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, which was created in 2020 with significant investments by MBC and Microsoft TechSpark. Lauren, thank you so much for being here. We look forward to your presentation. Take it away.
Thank you, Don. I am happy to be here with you. Again, my name is Lauren. I am here in Southern Virginia, and I'm happy to share with you all a bit about MidAtlantic Broadband. Next slide. I'm not seeing my slides.
Yeah, next slide.
The slide has been changed to Margaret Warner's quote.
Okay, so I will look on my side here. So MidAtlantic Broadband recently hosted U.S. Senator Mark Warner from Virginia. He stopped by our office, and this quote is from him. "If there is one thing we've all learned from COVID, it is that broadband connectivity is not a nice to have, it is an absolute necessity." And I'm sure that many of you on this call today agree with that, even before COVID became an issue for us. Next slide. For Southern Virginia, broadband really became a priority back in 2004 with the creation of MidAtlantic Broadband. Historically, our region has been really focused in agriculture and manufacturing of furniture and textiles. As we look towards the future, our region is adapting to be in the precision agriculture space as well as advanced manufacturing. And so no matter what industry Southern Virginia pursues, having access to high-speed broadband is absolutely necessary. The blue areas that you see shaded here represent the counties that MidAtlantic Broadband now has fiber built into. Next slide. This map is just a different view. It shows you the blue lines are NBC's 1,900 miles of middle mile network. The purple lines represent the long haul that connect our network up to Ashburn, as well as to Richmond, as well as to the subsea cables in Virginia Beach. NBC was created as a public-private partnership with initial funding from the U.S. Department of Commerce. The EDA, NTCA, and Virginia Tobacco Commission all came together to help make NBC possible. Since then, however, we've become self-sustainable. We're able to use our business model as a way to continue to build our network and also reinvest in our communities. I do want to mention that the NTIA grants help to assist with around 700 of our 1,900 miles. Next slide. This middle mile open access model has been proven through this case study with NBC and other organizations that are similar to us as a proven strategy to reduce cost of broadband expansion. So in this case, middle mile is referring to the segment of fiber optic, that infrastructure that connects basically where the internet begins, the primary network, and the last mile networks. NBC is an open access network, meaning that we have a very focused business model. We are not in the last mile business, but all of the last mile providers, as well as many of the over-the-top content providers, are our customers. Next slide. And so speaking of those large content providers, you might recognize this one is Microsoft. NBC was a major reason that Microsoft was able to locate their data center in Mecklenburg County, which sits geographically on the North Carolina line. And so it's strategically located between Richmond and Raleigh. That has helped with Microsoft being able to recruit the workforce that they need, as well as NBC and Microsoft have worked with the local community colleges to create data center academies that have become the model for Microsoft's data center academies across the country and worldwide. Microsoft has now invested around $3 billion in their data center in Mecklenburg County, so you can imagine the economic impact that that has made for Southern Virginia. Next slide. Another case study is around foreign direct investment. This is one situation where the community of Martinsville, Virginia, was recruiting a company called Hard Eyed to locate their U.S. facility here in Southern Virginia. And the reason that they were able to do that is because of NBC's network. So in this case, our network enables Hard Eyed to connect their carrier in the UK to their Virginia plant remotely. So they're able to operate their plant actually from over in the UK. Next. So NBC has built to all of the industrial parks across Southern Virginia, and as those industrial parks become populated with new businesses and businesses expand, we continue to build that network within each park. I selected this one, Cane Creek Park in Danville in Pittsylvania County, because it's just one that has seen a lot of really great activity lately. Just in 2020, we've extended our network to serve Morgan Olson, which is an advanced manufacturing company that builds all of the step fans. So we know that online shopping has increased in part because of COVID, and so all of those delivery trucks are have some connection to Morgan Olson and are being produced right here in Southern Virginia. We've also extended our network so that an ISP provider could serve Panaceutics, which is a health IT startup based in Southern Virginia. Next. So although we do not provide last mile service and don't have any intentions to expand into that space, we're still very much part of this broadband expansion ecosystem. We're part of Commonwealth Connect, which is Virginia's broadband coalition. It was created partially in response to Governor Northam's broadband plan, or really his challenge or his goal to achieve universal broadband access for all of Virginia. So the Commonwealth Connect Coalition has been charged with putting that plan together, as well as championing legislation at the state level that will assist with this. And so they're advocating to our legislators, as well as engaging with communities and localities across the region. Next. And so as the work continues across the state, NBC does partner with localities as they endeavor to implement their last mile solutions. NBC is headquartered in Halifax County, and so we're very proud of Halifax County's progress in this area. Their county administrator happens to be an engineer, and over the past year and a half or so, he has put together a very comprehensive plan to implement last mile coverage for the county. Right now, he's working off of 4 different grant projects, all of which NBC is a partner on. Next. In our region, being a more rural area, we do have several electric cooperatives, and several of those are getting into the last mile broadband space. And again, NBC is able to partner with them. They're a wonderful ISP solution because they're member driven, they're mission driven, they're nonprofit. They're able to make these long-term investments and not worry about that time that it's going to take them to pay back those investments. And so this is one way that the last mile solution is being delivered in Southern Virginia. Next slide. This is just my contact information. Thank you all for the opportunity to share NBC's story and some examples from our work with you today. Please feel free to email me or connect on LinkedIn or explore NBC's website. All of that is here for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Really appreciate your presentation, and apologies for the initial technical glitch. I also just want to say, NBC is a great model for how important middle mile networks are for economic development strategies in states in rural America. So thanks again for being here.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Our next presentation is going to start in just a moment. As a reminder, we're going to have time for questions at the end of the session. Use the question box on the right-hand side of your screen to submit questions or comments at any time. Our next speaker, we're really looking forward to hearing as well, is Idradel Kamor. He is currently the Principal Regional Planner at the Purdue Center for Regional Development, where he focuses on regional demographics, economic and workforce analysis, GIS databases, spatial analysis, and quantitative methods. Idradel has undergraduate and graduate degrees in architecture, urban, regional, and community planning from both India and the USA. He's earned a PhD in transportation and infrastructure systems from Purdue University. Thank you for being here today, Idradel. And I understand we're going to be hearing about a very exciting research project that was recently conducted by yourself and your team at Purdue. So take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for this opportunity. As Don has mentioned, I will be talking about a very specific study, jobs creation from rural broadband companies. And my colleague, Dr. Roberto Gallardo, and one of our graduate research assistants who graduated, Dr. Yongji Kim. So all 3 of us actually worked on this report, and as it entailed quite a bit of data analysis. Next slide, please. So this project involved quite a few partners, and we are thankful to every one of them. So Foundation for Rural Service, NTCA, your JSI, and then Rural Telephone Finance Cooperative, they all shared their data with us. Some of the data actually had come with a confidentiality parameter, and we followed those protocols. So quite a bit of data was gathered and compiled and analyzed for this project. Next slide, please. So what exactly it was? So the objective was to evaluate the economic effects. We can call it economic footprint or economic impacts, essentially for a small rural communications provider in the US. And then it is for a single year. So we need to understand that the study is limited on the economic impact snapshot for a single year. That said, we also estimate the ripple effects from the jobs created by the rural broadband companies. So a bit of idea for the scale that we are talking about. Rural broadband providers, they serve a large proportion of the nation's land mass, but roughly only 5% of the country's telecom subscribers. So we need to keep that scale in mind, that these are rural providers. Next slide, please. So what exactly this study is and what it isn't, we need to keep that context in mind. First, it is static. So it's actually a single year study and not a dynamic economic impacts where we are studying a multi-year impact for an investment. Then it is a single year, single geography economic input output type analysis. And when I said single year, single geography, is that we are delineating the states. These rural broadband companies are located in individual state. So we identified, triangulated those states, and then developed IO tables and IO models for those individual state. So what happens is whenever there is an economic shock, it can be gain or a loss. The spillovers can also happen over a space as well as time. So we need to keep in mind that the economic impacts we are presenting is limited to that geography. Means in that report, it is not accounting for spillovers, which can actually add to the economic impact. But the important thing is that these IO tables are made at the level of 6-digit, what we NAICS, what we know as North American Industry Classification System, or industry sectors, and that is the highest detail possible. So essentially, we are talking of IO model or IO table, which are like 1,000 rows by 1,000 columns. So pretty significant data is there. Now, finally, it is not a general equilibrium analysis. So this type of analysis is providing a static snapshot of economic impacts. We are not doing a social accounting matrix or type thing where we can analyze the policy impact. I mean, those kinds of study require quite a bit of additional data and additional time. Next slide, please. Okay, so data for this analysis we obtained from JSI and Foundation for Rural Service. We also used Reference USA to tag those data, and essentially they were actually culled from the members of NTCA, or Rural Broadband Association, and which represents roughly 850 community-based telecom companies serving the sparsely populated rural areas. And when we started triangulating those members, we were able to locate at least 2/3 of NTCA members to 44 states. And then we gathered all the data related to that, what are the individual NAICS code, the revenues and sales information and things like that. So actually, economic impacts are based on the specific information of those companies. Now remember, it's about 2/3 of companies, the data that were used for this study. Next slide, please. I think we have missed one slide before. Thank you. So the IO models were actually established for each of the 44 states separately. These companies are located in different states, and each state's economy is unique. The supply chain, value chain linkages are unique, and that's why individual IO models were established. We specifically used the Chamura Economics and Analytics. It's an online modeling group, and they have a platform known as Jobs EQ. So we are using the input-output modeling component from this modeling group. And then these IO models are capable of actually estimating the ripple effects, from jobs creation or even retention, sales, outputs, earnings. So these are some of the economic output that we can get from these models if we run those models for a regional economy. Now, when we talk about economic impacts, we need to know that the direct economic impacts happen when an industry or a member, the direct jobs they are creating or retaining, right? But then the next step comes in is estimating the ripple effects, and those are of two types: the indirect and induced effects. The indirect effects actually happens because of the supplier and other industries that are part of the value chain. And this is where each state's economy becomes unique. And then the induced effects or induced jobs can happen in the services and other support industries that are actually supporting these suppliers, and that may be actually supporting the main industry or main business entity as well. What happens is the economic impact is actually the sum total of the direct, indirect, and induced impacts. Next slide, please. So here is an example. So wired telecom carrier, that is the rank one, that is the tier one, where the jobs are created or retained, and then and it has some sort of business operation, some sort of revenue, sales activities, economic activities that are happening. And then the suppliers can be the engineering companies or semiconductor companies. So the supply chain that is part of that is coming in tier 2 or rank 2, and then rank 3, tier 3, where the induced impacts are happening. It can be accounting firms, lawyer, and even retail in the context that the wages and earnings that are spent by the households that can actually serve the service economy of the local areas and regions. Next slide, please. So what kind of economic impacts we are talking about? As I said, that this is a single year snapshot. So around in 2017, all these firms actually created or supported more than 77,000 jobs across different industries. And this is the snapshot for the 44 states in total. And the total economic impacts or the total economic output is approximately $10 billion. So that's a substantial economic footprint that we are talking about. And then almost $2.5 billion is in compensations. And then, the affected industries, the industries that are part of this, they are varying from communication carrier, then a variety of suppliers. We talked about it, manufacturers of semiconductors, engineering services, a certified public accountant, and even legal counsel. And the last bullet point, which is about different ranks, I think I had explained in the graphic previously. Next slide, please. So these NTCA member rural broadband companies, which we were able to analyze about 2/3 of those companies, they are actually a significant economic drivers in their rural communities. Now, the large economic impact can happen also if the jobs created are in large number, but then there is an additional role which I may want to highlight, is the catalyst role for broadband services in industries. So that catalyst is in any chemical reaction. What does catalyst do? It's not creating new chemical. It is basically increasing the efficiency or speed of that chemical process. So industries like broadband or logistics have the capacity to operate as a catalyst role. This particular term was actually coined in the context of logistics by Dr. Sheffy from MIT. There is a significant amount of research going on that, you need logistics for efficient manufacturing and goods movement. Similarly, you need broadband. It has sort of a catalyst role supporting multiple type of industries in increasing their efficiency. And that's why the economic footprint or impacts or ripple effects can be even larger. So a little bit on multipliers. So for every job created by an NTCA member, approximately 2 additional jobs were created in the regional economy. Now these job multipliers are actually varying by individual states because we ran individual state models. So it was about 3.4 in Arkansas and 2.2 in Alaska. All that said, the spatial variation over states, I have mentioned previously that every state is a unique economy on its own. And then finally, note that these impacts are a single year snapshot only. Next slide, please. And here is my contact, and you can access the report from Purdue Center for Regional Development website, and the address is there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Indranil. Really appreciate your comments and interesting study. Fascinating. Thanks. Hey, our next speaker is Josh Seiderman, and Josh is a Vice President of Policy for NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association. He focuses on federal regulatory issues as well as technology and market trends affecting rural telecom industries. He supports research initiatives and programming for the Smart Rural Community, an NTCA initiative promoting broadband-enabled economic development, education, and healthcare. He's also co-chair of one of my favorite groups, the NIST Global Cities Teams Challenge and Rural Ag Supercluster. Sorry, I had to get that in there. And he's also working with the high-tech jobs group of the FCC, the Precision Agriculture Task Force. He's a regular contributor to the NTCA blog and other media. He holds an undergraduate in law degrees from Yeshiva University and is admitted to practice law in New Jersey, New York, and the District of Columbia. Thanks for being here, Josh. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks very much, Don. Can you hear me okay?
It's just great.
Okay, great. It is really great to be here today. It was really quite a surprise to see that Kumar highlighted the economic impact of the NTCA membership in his study. That was a study that I've been aware of and had been involved peripherally in the development of it, not substantively, but at least working with our foundation as they were trying to manage it. But to see it presented to this audience is just very gratifying, and I'm just really pleased to see that those numbers come out to spill. What I'd like to do today is tell you a little bit about Smart Rural Community, and not so much the program itself, but more so the impacts that the small broadband provider member companies of NTCA have on their communities, and the spillover impacts that can occur throughout the nation and their regions. By way of introduction, NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, represents about 850 small, community-operated, facilities-based broadband providers. These are companies that began as telephone companies in the early part of the 20th century, serving areas where the Bell Company didn't build out because there just wasn't the business case to go to a town of maybe 5,000 or 10,000 people. All of our members are broadband deployed. We serve about 37% of the landmass of the United States, but only about 5% of the U.S. population. By using programs administered by the Federal Communications Commission, like Universal Service, by using loans and grants administered by the Department of Agriculture's Rural Utility Service, our members have combined those with private capital and innovative investment strategies. And their broadband achievement right now, 67% of our members can get speeds to their customers of 100 meg or higher. And 45% of our members can get those sorts of speed, can reach that sort of their membership base with a gigabit service. Next slide, please. Interior designer Barclay Butera reportedly said that if you really want to understand the best way to arrange the furniture in your house, take a look at how your guests arranged your furniture when they were at your last dinner party. Because how your guests rearranged your chairs and tables and furniture gives you a sense of what works best for others. And we can tend to see in many of our daily lives, and whether business or personal, we might think that this is the best way to do it, but then someone comes in and says, you know something, let's pivot a little bit, let's adjust, let's rearrange the furniture. My guess is that when the current crisis is over, we're not putting our broadband chairs back where they were before. We've learned a little bit. We've learned a little bit about how broadband is really used for education and for telehealth and for economic development. These are things that NTCA's members have been practicing for years, but the scope and scale and the intensity of the increase in the last 8 months has just been astounding, with maybe not just a few students learning from home, but all students learning from home. And maybe not just a few people telecommuting, but suddenly everyone telecommuting, or many people telecommuting. And my proposal, as we walk through these few slides today before the discussion, is that if we're really interested in building resilient rural community economies, what we need to think about are what are the important things for a rural community. Their jobs, its educational opportunities for children and adults, and its access to good health care. And broadband can support all of that. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to talk about education for a moment. During the COVID pandemic, 55 million K through 12 students in the United States were affected by COVID school closures. There are 49.5 million households with children 18 and under in the United States. And if we crunch the numbers a little bit more, if we take a look at households that have children who are between the ages of 6 and 18 years old who are school age, and then we develop that number to determine how many of those households have at least one working parent, and then think about how many of these working parents have the ability to telecommute, we're looking at 15 to 17 million households throughout the United States that will now, certainly over the last few months, possibly in the coming weeks, and maybe in the future as we begin to rethink about how we work from home and learn from home, 15 to 17 million households that must serve multiple broadband users simultaneously. Our members have really, just an example of what small town broadband companies have done. Members who are our Smart Rural Community Program in Rush Center, Kansas, Golden Belt Telephone Association, their students participated in a virtual field trip to Yellowstone National Park. They used a gigabit symmetrical connection that's provided by Golden Belt Telephone to the school. They have an industrial arts class that built an award-winning tiny house, and part of the educational process was teaching the kids how to deploy Cat5 cabling throughout the house. Again, all getting people really inculcated with the notion of how important broadband is. Copper Valley in Valdez, Alaska, supplements local staff with online tutorials, lectures, homework tracking, continuing education. Now again, these are all actions that were undertaken before the COVID crisis hit. But these are the sorts of building blocks that have been in place for years that suddenly we now see are so important. Let's take a look at the next slide. Let's talk about rural telehealth. Again, access to jobs, healthcare, educational opportunities. 48 million Americans live in rural areas, except that rural areas have 25% fewer physicians per 100,000 residents than urban areas. 60% of the nation's 7,200 health professional shortage areas are in rural counties. Poverty in rural areas can increase complications from chronic conditions and decreases the likelihood of obtaining treatment to prevent adverse outcomes. In our Smart Rural Community Program a few years ago, we wrote a paper. It was called Anticipating the Benefits, the Economic Benefits of Rural Telehealth. And we found that per facility, on average, rural telehealth deployment could save an average of $30,000 per year in lost wages and travel expenses that would otherwise be incurred when rural residents have to travel to distant hospital or health facilities. Rural telehealth can increase the local laboratory and pharmacy revenues ranging $12,000 to $45,000 a year. How is telehealth used? Let's take a look beyond these numbers to the human side. In Carrington, North Dakota, this is a population of fewer than 2,000 people. Dakota Central Telecommunications has a broadband network that supports the use of robotic devices in the home that can administer tests and medications and report patient information to the hospital over a fiber connection. In Moncks Corner, South Carolina, population of 12,000, that's a thriving metropolis compared to Carrington. The Roper St. Francis Moncks Corner Medical Center uses telepsychiatry. They have been able to reduce the average stay of patients from 36 to just 4 hours. And you can think of the cost savings and patient comfort knowing that they can be treated so quickly and not have to stay. Let's take a look at jobs. Let's take a look at the next slide. We know that telework is so important. There are 63 million Americans who can work from home. 40% of Americans can actually telework. And during the COVID pandemic, all of those 40% of Americans have teleworked in some capacity. The importance of telework can't be underestimated when you're thinking about the impacts of job loss and job decline during the COVID pandemic. For telework capable jobs at the beginning of the pandemic, the job decrease was just 0.5%, just a 0.5% shrinkage in job loss. But during that same period, for those jobs that weren't telework capable, the job decrease was 2.7%. Where do we see this again? Spilling out to human impact, and I know that these numbers can sometimes be overwhelming or numbing, they're so large, but in McKee, Kentucky, in Appalachia, People's Rural Telephone Cooperative is part of a program that covers 23 counties in rural Kentucky. It brings cutting-edge telework opportunities to workers, especially in rural areas and small towns. It has generated more than $70 million in economic activity and has supported more than 3,100 jobs, connecting teleworkers to employers who are well beyond this geographic region. But with broadband, these people can work anywhere. We're going to take a jump on to the next slide. I know that we can't talk about rural America without talking about precision agriculture. And as Don mentioned, it's so important, the rural and ag supercluster work of NIST and NTIA. I know we talk about GPS guidance on a tractor and people say, well, what do I need GPS? I'm just going from one end of my field to the other. But when you go from one end of that field to the other and you have to turn around and get that next row plowed or seeded, you're manipulating a boom arm that's 25 to 30 feet long. And you want to keep a tolerance of about 8 inches. Because imagine if you're just a little bit off and over distance, how that skews. Imagine how much land is consumed that doesn't need to be used, the inaccuracy of seeding, of fertilizer application, of irrigation. It's just the yield increases are measurable and astounding. We find, again, we've got a town in Sioux Center, Iowa, Premier Communications. Sioux County, Iowa is the 12th largest revenue generating county from agriculture in the United States. It has more than $1.6 billion in annual crop and livestock sales. Where does broadband come in? Broadband enabled sensors and feeding bins that can measure and dispense the exact amount of feed. There are other sensors that enable farmers to calibrate planting with soil conditions and track rainfall to create a mapping database of crop harvest by the acre. There are systems that can scan and image crops as the tractor moves through the field, send those images to the cloud using artificial intelligence, read the images, and then direct actions with fertilizer or perhaps or irrigation back down to the tractor in milliseconds. You're talking about blockchain and the value for agriculture. Systems that can load and track lettuce. We have all these, sometimes we have these recalls. And what happens is you have major grocery retailers across the country have to just get rid of an entire crop. We have to get rid of this type of lettuce. But where did it come from? But with blockchain, we can isolate the farm that bad batch may have come from. The rest of the food can stay on the shelves. Think of the food waste that's avoided. Think of the cost savings. Next slide, please. This, I really think, is what it's all about. Access to healthcare, access to jobs, access to educational opportunities. local broadband providers working with other local leaders to find collaborative solutions in order to create these opportunities so that when we think of rural America, we think of strength, we think of resiliency, we think of optimism, and it's welcome to our town, and let's build it now. Don, thanks so much for this opportunity.
Well, thank you, Josh. Appreciate your presentation. Well, now we're going to come to the question and answer component of this webinar. We've got a number of questions that have been raised by our audience, and Lauren, the first one is for you. They want to know what role MBC has in recruiting companies such as Microsoft to Southern Virginia.
Yes. So looking at the Microsoft example in particular, Microsoft was working with the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, which is our state level group that focuses on business attraction as well as expansion. They had identified and were in the final stages of actually another site in another part of Virginia, and kind of towards the end of that due diligence found that there was a reason that that site wouldn't work. And fortunately, Virginia maintains a very detailed database of available sites. And so rather than losing Microsoft as a client, they were able to refer them down to Southern Virginia, where the state partnership then worked with the county economic developers. And at that point, NBC was at the table to ensure Microsoft that our fiber could meet their needs.
Thank you. Thank you. So you're working very closely with the economic development organizations in Virginia.
Yes, absolutely. On a regular basis, we receive, as the economic developers are filling out their responses for inquiries, then they're forwarding the telecom piece to us to fill out that portion along with them.
Okay, thank you. Idranel, next question is for you, and it's obviously from someone in the audience who also likes quantitative methods. They want to know why you picked the Chumara platform, and for those in the audience, that's a labor and wage data platform. So,
Yes, it's a labor market platform, but it also has an economic input-output component. It is actually part of the jobs EQ platform. I think Chumara has different types of platform. So we actually only used the input-output modeling part of that one. Now that said, as I mentioned, there are other models also, and actually we did a bit of vetting also. So we have a subscription, and that's why we use that. And another thing was the impacts were run via the revenue and sales and all those components. And we were able to build individual state models within that. That's why we use that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's a very useful platform. I agree. Josh, there's a question for you, and that is, most of your members are obviously serving rural America. And I'm wondering, and the question is wondering, what do you see as the relationship? I mean, fiber is certainly a gold standard for premise connection, but a lot of places I work, and I think a lot of your members are also doing wireless systems. You want to talk about how you view the relationship between hardwire and wireless systems in rural America?
Sure. I think that the FCC summed it up best. They refer to them as complementary, but not perfect substitutes. We know that certainly there's a ton of work that gets conducted with telephone calls from our call when we're out in the field, when we're traveling. But we also know that, as Don said, that fiber-rich connection is necessary for so many of the data-intensive applications that we might be using. Now, we also know that 5G is on the horizon. That's going to give us blazing capacity and speeds when we're out and about. But again, it's always important to remember that 5G, like all wireless services, does require a wired connection within the network. So I'm going to stop now, but again, I'm happy to talk. I'm happy to just really talk through this with anyone, anytime.
I hear that. Lauren, another question the audience had was, you used the word open access. And could you briefly explain NBC as an open access network? Can you explain what that means?
Sure. So it essentially, I guess by comparison, if another provider was building their own middle mile component, then only they would be able to access that. And if another last mile provider wanted to get into that area, then they would have to access their own middle mile component. And so where NBC has the social welfare mission, and where open access means that any number of ISPs can build off of our middle mile. So we're not trying to block competition. We're actually trying to encourage it so that multiple ISPs could serve the same area. It helps to reduce their costs to get into the region then, and that was really the whole basis of bringing NBC to creation in the first place.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Janelle, question for you. The job impact report, the economic impact report, seems really significant to me in your study. Would you say that was that an extraordinarily high impact? Were you expecting something like that? Was that a surprise? I know Purdue's done a number of other such studies, but it seemed like a pretty dramatic impact from my point of view.
It is not actually that dramatic if you look into the multipliers. Multipliers are one way to compare, and 2.2 or 3.4, that means one job and approximately close to 2 jobs creating in the local and regional economies are not that dramatic. I would have been surprised if the job multipliers would have become higher, which they were not. Means this is not like an automotive sector. Means automotive sectors have really high multipliers dependent on the supply chains. And then there are other studies also that have established some major impacts. So late Professor Wallace E. Tyner from Department of Agricultural Economics at Purdue University did a very rigorous analysis. That was a benefit cost analysis for the broadband, and in a relatively rural area, because that cooperative is actually serving quite a bit of rural counties are there, and he came up with an estimate of 4:1. That's the benefit cost ratio. So every dollar invested may come up as a return, as a benefit of approximately $4. So now this study is not exactly a benefit cost study. This is a slightly different flavor, but we are talking of the entire US, 44 states approximately. That's where the data we were able to triangulate. But the multipliers, I think, are reasonable and believable. That's what I think.
I think the study you were talking about, that's the 4:1, that was the one where the Purdue folks estimated what would happen in the state if the rural co-op models were generally accepted throughout the state.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Josh, a policy question for you, and that is, what do you think is the single most important benefit of broadband in rural America?
Oh wow, single most. I'm going to dial it back, and I'm going to say that that question, I would frame the question differently. So I'm going to answer it this way. There are numerous economic, sociological, and other interdependencies between rural and urban spaces. So if you ask me what the greatest single impact is for broadband in rural America, it's that it connects it to the rest of the nation, no different than the post roads did that are provided for in the Constitution. And what that does is it allows rural Americans to import from urban America and to export to urban America, and it enables people in urban areas to export what they have to the rural areas and to bring to their areas what the rural areas produce.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I know a few years ago, the Hudson Institute did a study, and they said if you invest in rural broadband, the local, more populated areas benefit almost as much as the rural areas in terms of economic growth and activity. I often use that when we're doing technical work because it's nice to tell people who already have broadband that if you help invest in rural places nearby, you also benefit economically. So.
Right. I mean, I remember the study that you're talking about. There was almost a 50-50 split on jobs that are supported by rural broadband endeavors because all of the IT supplies are not produced in these towns of 5,000 people. Those are produced in major metro centers and the fleet vehicles and everything else that these companies use. So it's again, symbiotic relationships and interdependencies that really that really connect the nation.
Lauren, we have a very particular question from somebody who lives in the Rappahannock Electric Co-op area. They want to know if MBC is providing any middle mile services to that co-op.
And Rappahannock is a bit north of where the bulk of our network is, I believe, if I'm not looking at my map right in front of me. So I will say that we if I'm correct, then we do have an EDA application in right now to continue to expand our network both east and north. And so I can't confirm off the top of my head if we are working with that electric cooperative, but we are moving in these other directions to continue to expand.
Okay, thanks. Ivdel, I have a question that I guess it seems to me there's a lot of good answers to it, but mainly, why do you think fundamentally broadband is, I like to say it's not a magic bullet for economic development, but if you don't have it in your economic development strategy, rural America is not going to do well. What do you think the fundamental reason for broadband being so important as a part of rural economic development strategies? Why is that so important? As a catalyst.
Is that for me, right?
Yes, that's for you.
Yes, thank you. So catalyst is a term actually that came out from logistics research, and as I mentioned, I think in the talk that Dr. Sheffy, he has written a lot of book on logistics clusters, and essentially teasing out that we understand logistics a bit more, and I'm speaking because my background is transportation and infrastructure systems. So essentially, you improve logistics or invest in there, any kind of bulk good manufacturing and bulk good movement, the efficiency increases. And essentially, it actually then reaches out to the entire economy. Similarly, broadband is actually a network, right? Logistics and transportation is a network. Broadband is a network, or that's what we want to see. And Don or Josh and Don both mentioned precision ag and all those kinds of high technology initiatives that are going on. Those are only feasible if you have a proper type of broadband infrastructure to support that. And that's where the efficiency or adding to the efficiency part comes in. Now, teasing out that catalyst role through calculations, and that's a lot of work. And that is the future part maybe. But that's why I alluded that you improve broadband and you will be surprised how many different kind of industry sectors and home-based businesses, everything, every part of the socioeconomic system will improve because it's almost the network. It's the network behind it. Okay. So did I able to answer that a little bit?
Yes. No. Well done. Well done. Listen, there's another quantitative person who's interested in your choice of using CompuServe data and would like you to talk about the quality of the CompuServe data you used in comparison to perhaps federal databases about establishments?
So, so this depends on the establishment's data that we got, and thanks to Josh, a lot of data was given to us. Some of them were under the confidentiality parameter, as we mentioned. We had to locate these data, these companies to individual states. We knew the zip codes and things like that. And that's where we used I have just given one example, reference USA, but let me tell you, we have access to all sorts of establishment databases from Hoover's and Dun and Bradstreet, and different kinds of databases. So in the slide I have mentioned that, but actually we looked into different options to triangulate and locate these companies to different states. And that said, also in the previous question about the economic model, we have different economic models as well, and we did look into whether the results are reasonable or not. We chose to go with one. So that is one reason why we use that. And as I mentioned, about 2/3 we were able to locate it properly. And because of the confidentiality parameter, some of the companies we could not triangulate properly. But different kinds of establishment databases were used. Reference USA was just one of them. We have access to several of those in the center.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Listen, the webinar is just about over. We've got about another minute. Little bit of advertising for the future. We're going to take a webinar break in December and January, but please join us again on February 17th for the next webinar, which is entitled Data as the Foundation of Broadband Planning. That seems reasonable. I want to thank all our speakers again today. Everybody did a great job, really. Thanks so much for being here. And remember, the presentations and transcripts and audio recording should be available in about 7 days on the BroadbandUSA website. Finally, I just want to take a moment to say that broadband technical assistance is available from BroadbandUSA, and that includes broadband deployment, broadband expansion, and also very important digital equity issues, digital adoption, digital literacy training as well. So please, if you have any questions and would like one-on-one technical assistance on any of those issues, contact BroadbandUSA and we'll be happy to work with you. Thanks very much, everybody, and happy middle of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentlemen.